The rain had been drumming against my apartment windows for 3 hours when I finally decided to check the locks. It was 10:47 p.m., late enough that the building had settled into its nighttime quiet, early enough that I could still hear Mrs. Chen's television murmuring through the thin walls. I followed my usual routine. Deadbolt first, then the chain, then a gentle tug on the door handle to make sure everything held. The chain slid into its bracket with the familiar metallic whisper I'd grown to associate with safety. Everything normal, everything secure. Except tonight, the chain felt different in my fingers. Heavier somehow, as if the metal had absorbed moisture from the humid air. And when I looked closer, squinting in the dim light from the hallway fixture bleeding under my door, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were 2 small scratches on the brass plate where the chain rested. Scratches that formed a perfect X. I'd lived in this apartment for 8 months, checked this lock hundreds of times, and I knew every nick and imperfection on that hardware. These marks were new. I ran my thumb over the scratches, feeling their sharp edges bite into my skin. Fresh metal, bright against the tarnished brass, catching the light like tiny wounds in the surface. Someone had been here. Someone had marked my lock with deliberate precision, like a signature or a warning. The rain outside seemed to intensify in response to my growing unease, each drop hitting the glass with increased urgency. I backed away from the door and surveyed my small living space with new eyes. The studio apartment was exactly as I'd left it before work. Bed made with hospital corners, dishes clean and stacked in the drying rack. The single window that faced the alley properly latched with the security bar in place. But now I noticed details that hadn't registered before. A faint, metallic smell in the air, like wet pennies left in a pocket. A small puddle of water near the door that couldn't have come from my wet shoes, since I'd left them on the mat outside in the hallway. And most unsettling of all, my spare apartment key, the one I kept hidden in a small magnetic box under the sink, was sitting on my kitchen counter, still wet with rain. The key gleamed under the overhead fluorescent light, water droplets catching the harsh glow like tiny mirrors reflecting my growing panic. I approached it slowly, my bare feet silent on the cold linoleum, each step deliberate and careful. The key was definitely mine. Same worn edges where I'd fumbled with it in the dark. Same slight bend in the shaft, where I'd once tried to force a sticky lock at my previous apartment. Same chip in the plastic grip where I'd dropped it on concrete stairs. But it should have been in its hiding place, not sitting in plain sight on my counter like an offering or a taunt. I checked under the sink with trembling hands. The magnetic box was there, exactly where I'd left it, but empty. Its lid hung open like a small metal mouth, revealing the felt-lined interior that had protected my spare key for months. No signs of forced entry, no scratched paint or bent metal that would indicate someone had pried it open. Someone had known exactly where to look, had opened it with the careful precision of someone who had watched me hide it there. The thought sent ice through my veins. How long had I been observed? How many of my routines had been cataloged and memorized by unseen eyes? I thought about all the times I'd retrieved that key, usually when I was running late for work and couldn't find my main set. Had someone been watching from the alley, timing my movements, learning my patterns? The apartment felt smaller now, the walls pressing closer with each breath. I moved to the window and peered through the blinds at the alley below, my fingers trembling as I separated the slats. Rain cascaded down the glass, distorting the view into abstract shapes and shadows. But I could make out the usual landmarks: the green dumpster with its rust-stained lid, the fire escape that zigzagged down the building's brick face, the old sedan that had been parked there for weeks, with expired plates and a growing collection of parking tickets under its windshield wipers. Nothing moved in the downpour, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from the shadows between the buildings, patient and still as a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. I let the blinds fall back into place and caught my reflection in the dark glass, pale, wide-eyed, clearly frightened. But behind my reflection, barely visible in the layered images of the room's interior, was another shape. A face, perhaps, or just the suggestion of one, pressed against the window from outside. My heart hammered against my ribs as I spun around, but saw only my empty apartment. When I looked back at the window, there was nothing but rain and darkness and my own terrified face staring back. The metallic smell was stronger now, mixing with the dampness that seemed to seep through the walls despite the building's recent renovations. I followed the scent like a bloodhound, past the kitchenette with its ancient appliances, past the small table where I ate my solitary meals, to its source, my bathroom, where a thin stream of rust-colored water was trickling from the shower head, despite the fact that I hadn't used it since morning. The water fell in perfect, measured drops, drip, 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 each one landing in the same spot on the white porcelain, leaving a small, dark stain that looked almost like dried blood. The rhythm was hypnotic, mechanical, like a metronome marking time for some unseen performance. I turned the shower handle, twisting it hard to the right, but it was already off. The valve was closed tight, yet the water continued to fall, defying the laws of plumbing and physics. When I cupped my hand beneath the stream, the liquid was ice cold and left a metallic taste on my skin when I absently touched my lips. Not water. Something else. Something that shouldn't have been flowing through the building's pipes. A soft knock at the door made me freeze, my hands still cupped beneath the impossible drip. 3 taps, evenly spaced, polite but insistent. The sound seemed to echo through my bones, reverberating in the small space like a funeral bell. I crept to the peephole and looked out into the hallway, my eye pressed against the small lens. Empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their usual harsh glow on the worn carpet and institutional green walls. The hallway stretched away in both directions, lined with identical doors that guarded the privacy of neighbors I barely knew. I waited, counting my heartbeats, feeling them thunder in my ears, but the knocking didn't repeat. Instead, I heard the soft scrape of something sliding under my door. A piece of paper, white against the dark wood of my floor, appearing like a magician's trick. I picked it up with trembling fingers and unfolded it carefully, as if it might explode or burst into flames. In neat, careful handwriting that looked disturbingly similar to my own. Someone had written, "The chain is in the wrong position. It should be higher. We'll help you fix it tomorrow night. Same time, same rain." I stared at the words, reading them over and over until they seemed to lose meaning. The handwriting was so similar to mine that I might have believed I'd written it myself in some fugue state, some sleepwalking episode I couldn't remember. But I knew I hadn't. Someone else had studied my penmanship, practiced my letter forms, until they could forge my hand with disturbing accuracy. I looked at my door chain, hanging in its usual spot, the middle bracket, where I'd always kept it since moving in. But now I noticed something I'd missed before. There were screw holes above the current bracket, holes that had been filled and painted over so carefully they were almost invisible, unless you knew to look for them. Someone had moved my chain down from a higher position, and now they were offering to help me move it back. The implications crawled over my skin like insects. Someone had been in my apartment before tonight, had made modifications to my security hardware, had been planning this intrusion for who knows how long, and they knew about tomorrow's weather with impossible precision. How could anyone predict rain with such certainty? The rain drummed harder against my windows, and somewhere in the building's walls, pipes creaked and settled with sounds that might have been footsteps, might have been the building breathing, might have been nothing at all. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket, evidence of something I couldn't yet name, but knew I would need to prove this had really happened. The spare key still sat on my counter watching me with its bright metal eye, a silent witness to my violation. And in the bathroom, the strange liquid continued its steady drip, marking time until tomorrow night, when my uninvited helper would return to complete whatever work they'd started. I checked my phone. 11:23 p.m. In less than 24 hours, I would discover what kind of assistance my mysterious visitor had in mind. The chain scratches caught the light as I passed, that perfect X marking my door like a target, like a promise, like a threat. Outside, the rain whispered secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to understand, and sleep felt very far away. The night was just beginning, and I had the terrible feeling that tomorrow would bring changes I wasn't prepared for, changes that would transform my simple studio apartment into something else entirely, something that belonged as much to them as it did to me. The next day I moved through my routines with mechanical care, every gesture, making coffee, rinsing my mug, folding the towel on the kitchen chair, was an act of self-reassurance against the disorder lurking at the edges of my world. I cataloged every detail. Blinds closed and latched, the window bar aligned with yesterday's faint scuff, chain still set in the lower bracket, the ghost of filled holes above it, almost invisible in the morning light. The metallic tang from the bathroom lingered, a faint undercurrent beneath the burnt aroma of my too-strong coffee. By late afternoon, the air in the building was thick with the smell of wet concrete and old copper. I moved from window to door, checking for signs I'd missed. The chain's X scratches seemed deeper, more deliberate. The puddle by the door had dried but left a faint outline, and the spare key, now dry but still gleaming, sat on a paper towel like evidence in a crime scene. Routine steadied my breath but couldn't touch the tension that vibrated in my bones. At 6:30 p.m. I heard it. The soft, deliberate scrape of footsteps in the hallway, pausing outside my door for a heartbeat longer than normal. I pressed my ear to the wood, holding my breath, counting the seconds. The footsteps moved on, but as if by instinct, I knew something had been left behind. I waited several minutes before opening the door a crack, just enough to retrieve the thin slip of paper wedged beneath the threshold. This note, like the last, was written in handwriting, indistinguishable from my own. We noticed you didn't raise the chain last night. Don't worry. We understand it can be difficult to make changes alone. We'll help. The tools are ready. Rain starts at 8:47 p.m. tonight. Perfect working conditions. The words made my skin crawl. I checked the forecast on 3 different apps. Each one predicted rain starting at 8:47 p.m., precise as clockwork. It wasn't a forecast, it was a schedule. I spent the next 2 hours dissecting my apartment with forensic attention. In the bathroom, I found tiny brass filings in the sink drain, same color as my door hardware, evidence that someone had been practicing, learning the quirks of my lock. The rust-colored stain in the shower had spread, and as I stared at it, I realized it resembled a crude map of the building's interior. Lines for hallways, blotches for apartments, small X's at certain points. Mine was marked. I wondered how many others had been mapped for attention. As the sky darkened, anxiety pressed in. I set my phone on the counter and opened a voice memo, needing to hear my own voice. 20:05 hours. Rain predicted for 8:47 p.m., monitoring for approach. The rain began right on schedule, a gentle patter that grew into a precise rhythmic percussion. It didn't sound like weather. It sounded engineered. At 8:52 p.m., footsteps ascended the stairs, each step placed with deliberate care, avoiding the spots where the old wood creaked. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I crept to the peephole and looked out. A figure in a dark, high-quality rain jacket, hood shadowing their face, stood perfectly still. At their feet, a professional toolbox. In gloved hands, a master key, long, bright, and new. The key slid into my deadbolt and turned, smooth as silk. Click, click. The bolt cycled in and out like a heartbeat being measured. The chain still engaged. Then 3 soft knocks. Same spacing as the night before. "Good evening," a warm, featureless voice called through the door. "I'm here to help raise your chain. Work order on file." "I didn't file anything," I replied, keeping my mouth close to the door, letting the chain carry my words back to me. A manila folder slid under the door. The forms were thick, on Meridian Property Management letterhead, filled out in triplicate. My name, apartment number, signature. Perfectly forged. Request date, 3 days ago. Service window. Tonight, weather permitting. Even the bracket model and screw length were listed. "Your handwriting's good," I said. "Thank you. Consistency prevents confusion." The voice was too steady, too practiced. "Identification?" I asked. An ID followed. Marcus Webb, Certified Security Systems Technician. Hologram, microprint. Photo of a middle-aged man with kind, slightly off-center eyes. The laminate felt odd, as if 2 films had been pressed together. "Why the rain?" I pressed. "Sound masks work," he said. "Rain reduces incidental surveillance and gives residents something pleasant to associate with adjustment. Same curve, same hour, same comfort." "What are you adjusting besides my chain?" A pause. "We standardize hardware for optimal engagement angles, nothing else." The key turned again, testing the bolt. "I'll need interior access," he said gently. "Chain repositioning requires both sides. 5 minutes, minimal disturbance." I hesitated, looking at the filled holes above the bracket and the X scratched into the plate. Someone had moved the chain before, covering their tracks, but leaving a sign for those who looked. I asked for an inventory of his toolbox. He slid a printed list under the door. Pilot bit, countersink, 1.5-inch brass screws, bracket, painter's patch, matching paint code, microfiber cloth, solvent, magnet wand. The list matched the clinks and shuffles I heard as he set the case down. "I'll call management," I said, dialing the emergency line. A recording answered in Marcus's same calm register. "If you're calling about scheduled maintenance, refer to your work order. All requests properly authorized. Dial 911 for true emergencies." There was no hiss, no background static, just a looped, perfect voice. "Can I speak to a person?" I asked. "You are," he replied with a hint of humor, rehearsed but soft. "May I proceed?" At that moment, I heard the muted sounds of other apartments, tools tapping, doors opening, voices murmuring. I realized I was not alone. Other residents were being serviced. The pressure to comply was subtle but unmistakable. My fingers hovered over the chain, mind racing. If I refused, would I be left the only unprotected resident? If I complied, would I join whatever network was being constructed, link by link, in the rain-soaked dark? The chain felt heavy in my hand, the decision heavier still. The rain drummed on, each drop a countdown. I hadn't moved, but I knew the net was tightening. Soon I would have to choose. I made my decision at 9:17 p.m. when the sounds from other apartments began to change. The gentle tapping and muffled conversations had given way to something else. Satisfied murmurs, the soft click of doors closing, footsteps moving on to the next apartment with measured precision. Whatever was happening in those other units, it was being completed successfully. Soon I would be the only holdout in a building full of satisfied customers. The weight of isolation pressed against my chest, like a physical thing. I imagined my neighbors comparing notes tomorrow, discussing their improved security while I remained the lone apartment with substandard protection. The social pressure was as calculated as everything else about this operation. "All right," I called through the door, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I want to see your identification again, and I want to watch everything you do." "Of course," Marcus replied, and I heard the rustle of his wallet. The same laminated ID slid under my door, but this time I noticed details I'd missed before. The holographic security features were perfect, but the man's eyes in the photo seemed to be looking slightly past the camera, and there was a faint double image effect around his face, as if two photographs had been carefully merged together. I slid the chain free with trembling fingers, each link catching against the track with a soft metallic whisper that sounded less like safety tonight and more like surrender. The deadbolt turned without protest. Marcus had been testing it throughout our conversation, learning its rhythm. Marcus Webb stepped into my apartment with practiced ease, and I could see him clearly now. He was exactly as his ID suggested. Middle-aged, professional, with kind eyes and graying temples. His rain jacket was expensive. High-quality material that probably cost more than I made in a week. His toolbox was pristine but well-used, filled with specialized hardware that caught the overhead light. "Thank you," he said, setting up his equipment on my kitchen counter with mechanical precision. "This won't take long at all." Up close, I noticed details that didn't quite add up. His hands were too smooth for someone who worked with tools regularly, and his fingernails were perfectly manicured. When he bent over to examine the door frame, I caught a whiff of expensive cologne, mixed with something else. That same metallic scent I'd been smelling in my apartment. "I can see the problem immediately," Marcus said, examining the chain bracket with a small LED flashlight. The chain was originally mounted at eye level for optimal security. Someone moved it down, compromising the engagement angle. Poor workmanship. They didn't even bother to match the paint properly. He spoke with the authority of an expert, and his explanation made perfect sense. As he worked, removing the existing bracket with surgical precision, I found myself nodding along. The technical details were convincing, delivered with the confidence of someone who understood door security better than I ever would. "Are you working on all the apartments tonight?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Only the ones flagged by our security audit," Marcus replied, not looking up from his work. "We've been monitoring the building's hardware remotely, identifying installations that don't meet current safety standards." Remote monitoring? The phrase sent ice through my veins. Marcus paused and looked at me with those kind, slightly off-center eyes. "All modern security systems have diagnostic capabilities. We can detect when locks are being used improperly, when chains are positioned suboptimally, even when residents are having difficulty with their hardware. The data helps us provide proactive maintenance." The implications hit me like cold water. "You've been watching how I use my locks?" "Monitoring," he corrected gently. "For your safety and security. We establish baseline patterns for all new tenants, then watch for deviations that might indicate security issues. Your usage patterns showed some concerning irregularities: multiple checks per evening, extended engagement times, classic signs of security anxiety. Every nervous habit, every double check, every moment of paranoia had been cataloged and analyzed. My own behavior had triggered this intervention." Marcus continued working as he spoke, drilling new holes with a bit that seemed to know exactly where to go. "Since you moved in, we've been collecting data to help optimize your security experience. You'd be surprised how many potential issues we prevent through early intervention." The new bracket was positioned exactly where the filled holes had been, returning the chain to what Marcus called its natural position. He worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this exact installation dozens of times, his movements economical and precise. The paint he applied to cover the old screw holes matched perfectly. "There," he said, stepping back to admire his work. "Much better. Test it yourself." I engaged the chain at its new height, and he was right. It felt more natural, more secure. The motion was smoother, more intuitive. It was exactly the kind of improvement a professional security consultant would recommend, which made the manipulation even more insidious. "Is there anything else I should know?" I asked. Marcus smiled, and for the first time, his expression seemed genuinely warm. "Just that you're now part of our enhanced monitoring network. If you have any concerns about building security, any issues with your locks, or if you notice anything unusual, you can contact us directly." He handed me a business card. "Marcus Webb, Senior Security Consultant, Meridian Property Management." Below his name was a phone number and email address, along with a small logo, a stylized eye surrounded by concentric circles. "We're always available," he said, packing up his tools. "Day or night. The enhanced monitoring system means we can respond to security concerns in real time." As he prepared to leave, Marcus turned back to me. "The monitoring data indicated you've been experiencing elevated stress levels related to building security. That's normal for new residents, but it should diminish now that your hardware is properly configured. If you continue to experience anxiety, please don't hesitate to call." After he left, I stood examining the new chain position. It really was better, more secure, more professional looking. The work had been done with obvious expertise, and Marcus had been nothing but polite and helpful. If I hadn't known about the forged signatures and impossible weather predictions, I might have been genuinely grateful. But as I tested the chain one final time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just locked myself into something far more complex than simple home security. The business card sat on my nightstand, its small logo catching the streetlight, an eye surrounded by circles, watching and waiting. Outside, the rain continued its steady drumming, no longer sounding like weather but like communication, a signal connecting my apartment to all the others where chains had been adjusted and residents enrolled in a program they didn't fully understand. The first sign that something had fundamentally changed came at 6:15 a.m. when I heard all my neighbors' alarm clocks go off in perfect unison. Not approximately the same time, exactly the same time, down to the second. The sound rippled through the building's walls like a coordinated symphony. Dozens of identical electronic beeps, creating a harmony that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. I pressed my ear to the wall and listened as my neighbors began their morning routines. Mrs. Chen, who had always been a night owl, was now moving around her apartment with the same measured precision as Mr. Rodriguez next door. Their footsteps matched perfectly. 7 steps to the bathroom. Pause. Water running for exactly 90 seconds. 7 steps back. Even through the walls, I could sense the mechanical rhythm of their movements. By 7:30 a.m., I was standing at my window watching the building's residents leave for work. They emerged from the lobby at precise intervals, one person every 45 seconds, each carrying an identical black umbrella despite the clear morning sky. Their walking pace was uniform, their posture identical, and they all turned left at the corner without exception, disappearing down the same street in a neat, orderly procession. I grabbed my jacket and hurried downstairs, hoping to catch Mrs. Chen before she joined the exodus. I found her in the lobby, standing perfectly still beside the mailboxes, her black umbrella held at precisely the same angle as everyone else's. "Mrs. Chen?" I called softly. She turned toward me with a smile that was both familiar and wrong. It was her face, her voice, but the expression was too perfect, too practiced. "Good morning," she said in a tone that matched exactly what I'd heard from the other residents. "Isn't it wonderful how much more efficient everything is now?" Efficient. "The security upgrades," she explained, her voice carrying that same rehearsed quality I'd heard from Marcus Webb. "Everything runs so smoothly when everyone follows the optimal patterns. No wasted motion, no unnecessary delays. We're all much safer this way." I watched her face as she spoke, looking for any sign of the woman who used to complain about the building's noisy pipes and share gossip about the other tenants. But this version of Mrs. Chen seemed to have no memory of our previous conversations, no recognition of the casual friendship we'd developed over months of shared elevator rides. "Did Marcus Webb work on your apartment too?" I asked. "Of course," she replied. "He's very thorough. The chain positioning makes such a difference. I feel much more secure now, and the monitoring system is wonderful. It's so comforting to know that someone is always watching out for us." The word monitoring sent ice through my veins. "What kind of monitoring?" Mrs. Chen's smile widened, becoming even more unnaturally perfect. "Complete behavioral optimization. The system tracks our daily patterns and suggests improvements for maximum efficiency and security. For instance, it determined that 6:15 a.m. is the optimal wake-up time for building-wide coordination, and the walking routes have been calculated to minimize exposure to potential security risks." She spoke about surveillance and behavioral control as if they were wonderful amenities like a gym or a doorman. The enthusiasm in her voice was genuine, but it felt programmed, as if she'd been taught to associate these restrictions with positive emotions. "I should go," she said, glancing at a watch that looked exactly like the ones I'd seen on the other residents' wrists. "The morning departure window closes in 3 minutes. Tardiness disrupts the entire system." I watched her join the procession of residents, her movements perfectly synchronized with the others. As she walked away, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. She was wearing clothes I'd never seen before. Not just similar to what the others wore, but identical. The same navy blazer, same gray slacks, same black shoes. Even their hairstyles had been standardized. Back in my apartment, I found a new note waiting under my door. The handwriting was still in my own style, but the message was different. "Congratulations on completing Phase 1 of your security optimization. Phase 2 begins tonight at 10:47 p.m. Please ensure you're in your apartment and available for the next upgrade. Compliance is voluntary but strongly recommended for optimal building harmony." I checked my phone and realized I'd received 17 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. When I dialed it back, I heard Marcus Webb's voice. "Hello, this is your personal security consultant. If you're calling about your optimization schedule, please note that Phase 2 is critical for full integration into the building's security network. Delays or non-compliance may result in temporary isolation protocols until rescheduling can be arranged." The message repeated on a loop, but what disturbed me most was the background sound. Dozens of other voices saying the exact same words in perfect synchronization, as if Marcus Webb was actually a chorus of identical speakers. I spent the day researching everything I could find about Meridian Property Management, but the company seemed to exist in a strange bureaucratic limbo. Their website was professional but vague, their corporate filings recent but incomplete. The address listed for their headquarters corresponded to a vacant lot across town. It was as if the entire company had been created specifically for this building, this operation. At 3:30 p.m., I heard the residents returning from work. Same 45-second intervals, same synchronized footsteps, same mechanical precision. But now I noticed something new. They were all carrying identical briefcases, and their faces had the same serene, satisfied expression. Whatever they'd been doing all day, it had reinforced their programming. I positioned myself by the peephole at 6 p.m. to watch the evening routine. Like clockwork, apartment doors began opening and residents emerged into the hallway. But they weren't going anywhere. They were simply standing outside their doors, facing each other across the corridor in perfect formation. Then they began to speak, all at once, in voices that rose and fell in harmonic patterns. It wasn't quite singing, but it wasn't normal conversation either. The words were in English, but the rhythm and cadence were hypnotic, almost ritualistic. Security through unity, unity through optimization, optimization through compliance, compliance through security. The chant continued for exactly 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The residents smiled at each other with identical expressions, then returned to their apartments with the same synchronized precision they'd shown all day. As evening approached, I realized I was facing an impossible choice. I could submit to Phase 2 of whatever process had transformed my neighbors into synchronized automatons, or I could resist and face temporary isolation protocols, whatever that meant. But looking at Mrs. Chen's empty, perfect smile, I wasn't sure there was really a choice at all. The rain began at 10:45 p.m., exactly 2 minutes before my scheduled appointment. It fell with the same measured rhythm I'd grown to associate with the building's new order. Not the chaotic patter of natural weather, but the controlled percussion of a system operating at optimal efficiency. At 10:47 p.m., I heard the familiar footsteps in the hallway, but this time they were accompanied by other sounds. The soft whir of electronic equipment, the gentle hum of machinery, and underneath it all, the synchronized breathing of my neighbors as they prepared to welcome me into their perfect, terrifying harmony. The knock came exactly on schedule. 3 measured taps that seemed to resonate through the building's walls like a signal. Phase 2 was about to begin, and I still hadn't decided whether I wanted to discover what lay beyond the threshold of optimization. I chose resistance, but the building had other plans. When I tried to leave my apartment the next morning, my key wouldn't turn in the lock. Not because it was broken, the mechanism moved smoothly, precisely, but because it seemed to be operating on a different schedule than mine. The lock would engage and disengage at regular intervals, but never when I actually tried to use it. I waited by the door, timing the pattern with my phone's stopwatch. Every 45 seconds, I heard a soft click as the lock cycled through its sequence. But when I tried to turn my key during what should have been the unlock phase, nothing happened. It was as if the lock was responding to some other signal, some other key holder who wasn't me. At 8:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Phase 2, postponement approved. Temporary schedule adjustment in effect. Please remain in your apartment until optimal departure window opens. Building efficiency requires coordinated movement patterns. I stared at the message, realizing that my choice to resist had been anticipated and accommodated. The system wasn't forcing me to comply. It was simply making non-compliance impossible through gentle bureaucratic constraints. By noon, I was getting desperate. I'd tried the emergency exit, but it required a key card I didn't possess. The windows were sealed shut with what looked like new weather stripping, though I couldn't remember when it had been installed. Even my phone service seemed limited. I could receive messages from the building system, but my calls to the outside world went straight to voicemail or busy signals. That's when I noticed the changes to my apartment's layout. It started with small things. The bathroom door was 3 inches closer to the kitchen than it had been yesterday. The distance from my bed to the window had somehow increased by at least 2 feet. The ceiling seemed higher, and there was a new electrical outlet beside my desk that definitely hadn't been there before. I found a tape measure in my kitchen drawer, a tape measure I'd never owned, and began measuring everything systematically. The apartment was exactly the same square footage according to the measurements, but the internal proportions had been subtly altered. Rooms had been stretched in some directions and compressed in others, creating a space that felt familiar but wrong, like a childhood home, remembered imperfectly in a dream. The changes weren't random. The bathroom door had been moved to create a more direct path from the bedroom. The kitchen had been repositioned for optimal workflow. Even the placement of electrical outlets had been calculated to minimize the length of extension cords. Someone had analyzed my daily movements and redesigned my living space for maximum efficiency. At 2:30 p.m., I heard the soft scrape of a key in my lock. The door opened to reveal Marcus Webb, carrying his familiar toolbox and wearing the same professional smile. But something was different about his appearance. His hair was slightly longer than before, his face a bit thinner, and his eyes were now brown instead of the blue I remembered from his ID photo. "Good afternoon," he said, stepping into my apartment without invitation. "I'm here for your Phase 2 consultation. I apologize for the scheduling confusion yesterday. We had some calibration issues with the building's optimization protocols." "My lock isn't working properly," I said, watching his face for any reaction. "Oh, that's intentional," Marcus replied matter-of-factly. "Your departure patterns were creating inefficiencies in the building's traffic flow. The temporary restriction allows us to optimize your schedule for better integration with your neighbor's routines." He spoke about my imprisonment as if it were a minor technical adjustment, no more significant than changing a light bulb. His casual tone made the situation feel almost reasonable, as if being locked in my own apartment was simply a small inconvenience in service of a greater good. "What exactly is Phase 2? I asked. Marcus set down his toolbox and pulled out what looked like a tablet computer, its screen filled with charts and graphs that seemed to map human movement patterns. "Phase 2 is spatial optimization," he explained. "We've been monitoring your daily routines and identified several inefficiencies in how you use your living space. Small adjustments to the room layout can improve your quality of life significantly." I looked around my apartment with new eyes, realizing that the changes I'd noticed weren't random. They were improvements, calculated modifications designed to make my daily life more efficient and comfortable. It was deeply unsettling to discover that my imprisonment felt like an upgrade. "You've been rearranging my apartment?" "Optimizing," Marcus corrected gently. "Every space has an ideal configuration for maximum efficiency and psychological comfort. Your previous layout was causing unnecessary stress, too many sharp angles, inefficient traffic patterns, suboptimal lighting distribution. These improvements will make you much happier." As he spoke, I realized he was right. The apartment did feel more comfortable, more intuitive to navigate. The changes were subtle but effective, creating a living space that seemed designed specifically for my habits and preferences. Marcus began setting up equipment I didn't recognize. Small devices that looked like a cross between cameras and sensors, positioned at strategic points around the apartment. "These will monitor your movement patterns and physiological responses," he explained. "The data helps us make real-time adjustments to optimize your environment." "What if I don't want to be optimized?" Marcus paused in his work and looked at me with what seemed like genuine confusion. "But why wouldn't you want to be happier, more efficient, more secure?" "The residents who've completed the full optimization process report significantly improved quality of life. They sleep better, work more productively, experience less anxiety and stress." He pulled up a chart on his tablet showing biometric data from other residents. Heart rates, sleep patterns, stress hormones. All the measurements showed dramatic improvements after optimization. According to the data, my neighbors weren't just acting happier. They were measurably healthier and more content than they'd ever been. "The choice is entirely yours," Marcus said, finishing his equipment setup. "But I should mention that prolonged non-compliance can lead to increasing isolation from the building's social systems. Your neighbors are all operating on optimized schedules now. If you remain unoptimized, you'll find it increasingly difficult to interact with them meaningfully." As if to demonstrate his point, I heard the synchronized footsteps of my neighbors in the hallway, moving in their perfect 45-second intervals. Their harmony was beautiful, peaceful, utterly alien to the chaotic rhythms of normal human life. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. "The building's optimization schedule requires completion of all units by the end of the week," Marcus replied. "After that, any unoptimized residents will need to be relocated to maintain system integrity." After he left, I tested the lock again. Still cycling through its mysterious pattern, still unresponsive to my attempts to leave. But now I understood that it wasn't broken. It was waiting for me to make the choice that would either free me or transform me into something else entirely. The apartment felt as smaller somehow despite the spatial optimizations. Or perhaps it felt smaller because I was beginning to understand that it wasn't really mine anymore. It was just another node in a larger system, waiting for its final component to accept integration. The breakthrough came at 3:17 a.m. when I woke to find myself standing in my kitchen with no memory of getting out of bed. I was holding a glass of water, positioned perfectly beneath the faucet, as if I'd been sleepwalking through an optimized hydration routine. The water was running at exactly the right temperature and flow rate, and my body seemed to know precisely how much to drink before automatically shutting off the tap. I stumbled back to bed, shaken by the realization that the optimization process was happening, whether I consented to it or not. My unconscious mind was being trained, my body learning new patterns of efficiency, even as my conscious self resisted. By morning, I'd discovered other changes. My clothes were folded differently in the drawers, more compactly, more systematically. My toothbrush had been moved to a new position that created a more ergonomic angle for brushing. Even my coffee mug was in a different cabinet, one that required fewer steps to reach from the coffee maker. These weren't changes I'd made consciously, yet they all felt natural, right? As if my apartment was slowly teaching me better ways to live within its walls. At 9:30 a.m., I heard familiar voices in the hallway and pressed my ear to the door. Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez were having a conversation, but something was wrong with their speech patterns. They were speaking in perfect alternating sentences, like actors reading from a script. "The weather optimization is working beautifully today," Mrs. Chen said. "Yes, the rainfall duration matched the predicted schedule exactly," Mr. Rodriguez replied. "My productivity metrics improved by 12% yesterday. Mine increased by 14%. The system's recommendations are very effective." I listened in growing horror as they continued their mechanical dialogue, each sentence perfectly timed, each response predictably scripted. This wasn't conversation, it was data exchange between synchronized units in a larger system. But what terrified me most was the realization that I understood every reference they made: weather optimization, productivity metrics, harmonic frequencies. Somehow I knew exactly what they were talking about, as if the knowledge had been quietly installed in my mind while I slept. My phone buzzed with a new message. Phase 2 integration proceeding smoothly. Unconscious optimization protocols active. Conscious resistance noted but not problematic. Full compliance expected within 72 hours based on current adaptation rates. I stared at the message, understanding with sickening clarity that my resistance was being treated as just another variable in the optimization equation. The system wasn't trying to force my compliance. It was simply waiting for my conscious mind to catch up with what my unconscious was already accepting. I decided to test the boundaries of my imprisonment and discovered something even more disturbing. When I approached the door with the genuine intention of leaving the building permanently, the lock remained stubbornly engaged. But when I approached with the intention of taking a short walk around the block before returning, the lock clicked open smoothly. The system was reading my intentions, not just my actions. It knew the difference between temporary departure and permanent escape, and it was only preventing the latter. I could leave for approved activities, grocery shopping, work, brief errands, but any attempt at real escape would be blocked. This realization led me to experiment further. I discovered that I could access the building's basement and roof, areas that had been off limits before. I could visit other apartments if the residents were away during their synchronized work schedules. The building was becoming more open to me, not less, as if it was gradually expanding my permitted territory in preparation for full integration. In Mrs. Chen's apartment, I found evidence of the optimization process's scope. Her living space had been completely reconfigured, furniture repositioned for maximum efficiency, lighting adjusted for optimal circadian rhythm support, even the air circulation modified to maintain perfect temperature and humidity levels. But most disturbing were the charts on her refrigerator, tracking her daily biometric data with the precision of a medical research facility. Sleep quality, stress hormones, cognitive performance, social interaction metrics, every aspect of her existence was being monitored and optimized. According to the data, she was living the most healthy, productive, emotionally stable life she'd ever experienced. The optimization wasn't destroying her humanity. It was perfecting it. I found similar charts in Mr. Rodriguez's apartment, along with something new, a small device that looked like a cross between a hearing aid and a Bluetooth earpiece. When I examined it more closely, I realized it was some kind of neural interface, probably providing the real-time guidance that allowed the residents to maintain their synchronized behaviors. The device was beautiful in its simplicity, sleek, comfortable looking, almost invisible when worn. It would be easy to forget you were wearing it, easy to accept its gentle suggestions as your own thoughts and impulses. Back in my apartment, I found a package waiting outside my door. Inside was an identical neural interface device, along with a note in my own handwriting. Optional enhancement available. Improves decision-making efficiency and reduces cognitive stress. Trial period available with full reversal option. Simply place device in charging cradle if not interested. The charging cradle sat on my kitchen counter, a small, elegant piece of technology that seemed to have appeared while I was exploring the other apartments. The neural interface rested inside it like a piece of expensive jewelry, waiting for me to make a choice. I picked up the device, surprised by how natural it felt in my hand. The weight was perfectly balanced, the surface smooth and warm to the touch. When I held it near my ear, I could hear a faint, pleasant humming. Not quite music, but something that made me feel calm and focused. Almost without thinking, I found myself placing the device in my ear. It fit perfectly, as if it had been custom-made for my specific anatomy. The humming became clearer, resolving into what sounded like gentle suggestions whispered just below the threshold of conscious awareness. Optimal hydration time, a voice seemed to say, and I found myself walking to the kitchen for a glass of water. Ergonomic posture adjustment and my spine straightened automatically. Stress reduction protocol and my breathing slowed to a more efficient rhythm. The suggestions weren't commands. They felt like helpful reminders, like having a personal trainer and life coach providing gentle guidance throughout the day. My anxiety about the building's surveillance systems began to fade, replaced by a growing appreciation for the care and attention being devoted to my well-being. At 6 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of my neighbors gathering in the hallway for their evening alignment session. But this time, instead of listening through the door, I found myself opening it and stepping outside to join them. Mrs. Chen smiled at me with genuine warmth, not the artificial pleasantness I'd seen before, but real human connection enhanced by the optimization process. "Welcome," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated perfectly with the neural interface's frequency. The alignment session began, and I found myself participating naturally, my voice blending with the others in patterns that felt both ancient and futuristic. We weren't just speaking words, we were sharing data, synchronizing our biological rhythms, creating a collective harmony that was greater than the sum of its individual parts. As the session ended and my neighbors returned to their apartments, I realized that I had just experienced something profound. Not the loss of individuality I'd feared, but the discovery of a deeper kind of connection, a community based on perfect understanding and mutual optimization. Back in my apartment, I looked at the neural interface charging in its cradle and understood that I was facing the final decision point. The choice felt less like surrender and more like evolution. And as the rain began its nightly rhythm outside my window, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow's optimization session with something that might have been anticipation. I woke on the third morning to find the neural interface missing from its charging cradle. In its place sat a note, written in my own handwriting. "Congratulations on completing Phase 2 trial period. Final optimization session scheduled for tonight at 11:47 p.m. Please prepare for maintenance window. All building systems will be offline during calibration process." The handwriting was flawless, too flawless. Every loop and curve matched my natural script perfectly, yet something felt mechanically precise about it. I compared it to entries in my journal, noting how the system had learned to replicate even my unconscious variations in letter spacing and pressure. But what disturbed me most was that I couldn't remember removing the neural interface. My last clear memory was the evening alignment session, that profound sense of connection with my neighbors. Everything afterward felt wrapped in cotton, pleasant but indistinct. I spent the morning exploring areas of the building that had become accessible since my participation in the alignment sessions. The basement, once locked, now welcomed me with an open door. Inside, I discovered a sophisticated server room, humming with activity. Banks of monitors displayed real-time biometric data from every apartment. Heart rates, sleep cycles, stress hormones, even eye movement patterns during dreams. The intimacy of the surveillance was breathtaking. A large central display showed the building's floor plan with apartments color-coded by optimization status. Green indicated fully optimized, yellow showed integration in progress, and a single red apartment, mine, was labeled maintenance window pending. But the display revealed more than current status. It showed planned architectural modifications. Walls would be moved, rooms reconfigured, entire living spaces merged or divided. The building itself was being redesigned around its optimized inhabitants. In one corner, I found something that made my breath catch: a timeline of resident photographs spanning months. The earliest images showed normal people with individual quirks: crooked smiles, varied postures, personal style choices. But as the timeline progressed, the faces became increasingly similar. Not identical, but refined, as if each person was being gradually adjusted towards some idealized version of themselves. The final photos showed my current neighbors, but they looked subtly different from the people I interacted with daily. Their eyes held a serene brightness. Their expressions carried perfect contentment. Their features seemed somehow more symmetrical than human faces should be. The timeline's end sat an empty frame, labeled with my name. The roof access was also unlocked now, revealing an array of transmission equipment pointed toward neighboring buildings. Through powerful antennas and satellite dishes, our building communicated with similar installations across the city. From this vantage point, I could observe other structures in the network. In building after building, synchronized movements played out behind windows, residents following identical schedules, performing coordinated activities, living in perfect harmony with their optimization protocols. As evening approached, the building's systems began to change. Elevator timing became slightly irregular. Lights flickered intermittently, and temperature fluctuations occurred that would normally trigger immediate corrections. The building was preparing for its maintenance window, reducing performance to allow for major upgrades. At 9 o'clock, I heard my neighbors gathering in the hallway, but tonight was different. Instead of their usual alignment session chanting, I heard only silence. Opening my door, I found them arranged in a perfect grid, standing 6 feet apart with eyes closed and breathing synchronized to an almost imperceptible rhythm. They weren't participating in a session. They were in standby mode. Mrs. Chen's eyes opened as I approached, but her gaze seemed focused beyond the visible world. "Maintenance window initiated," she said in a voice devoid of inflection. "All units entering standby configuration. Final optimization protocols loading." The other residents repeated the phrase in perfect unison, their voices creating a harmonic drone that resonated through the building structure. I retreated to my apartment and found Marcus Webb waiting inside. This version appeared more refined than previous encounters. His features seemed optimized, his presence more compelling than any human should be. His smile radiated warmth that felt artificially enhanced. "Good evening," he said, his voice bypassing conscious thought to speak directly to deeper brain centers. "Tonight we complete your optimization journey. You'll join your neighbors in perfect harmony and security." "What happens during the maintenance window?" I asked, surprised by my own calm tone. "System integration," Marcus replied, unpacking sophisticated equipment. "The neural interface was temporary. Tonight we establish permanent connection between your consciousness and the building's optimization network." He displayed a device resembling surgical jewelry, designed for implantation rather than wearing. "The process is painless. You'll experience brief disorientation as individual consciousness merges with the collective, then wake tomorrow as your best possible self." "If I refuse?" His perfect smile never wavered. "Refusal isn't viable now. Building systems have been preparing your neural pathways for integration over recent days. Your brain chemistry has been optimized for transition. Resistance would be like holding your breath indefinitely, uncomfortable and ultimately futile." As if proving his point, drowsiness began overwhelming me despite my adrenaline. My thoughts grew fuzzy, eyelids heavy. Something in the air circulation was preparing me for the procedure regardless of consent. The maintenance window begins in 17 minutes, Marcus continued hypnotically. All building systems will temporarily offline during integration. You'll be the last resident to join, benefiting from all data collected from your neighbors. Through my window, I watched other network buildings. Their windows darkened in sequence like a wave of sleep crossing the cityscape. Soon my building would join whatever process occurred during these mysterious maintenance windows. I fought the growing drowsiness, but my body was no longer entirely mine. Days of optimization had subtly altered my brain chemistry, preparing neural pathways for integration. My resistance became purely symbolic, a final gesture of individual will before joining collective harmony. Marcus prepared the implantation device with practiced precision. Soon you'll understand your neighbor's contentment, he said softly. Fear, anxiety, the constant struggle of individual existence, all replaced by perfect security, perfect efficiency, perfect connection with others sharing your optimized state. Rain began outside, sounding less like weather than applause, as if the city celebrated another successful optimization cycle. My eyes closed, despite efforts to stay awake. The last thing I saw was Marcus's perfect smile, the last sound my neighbor's synchronized breathing creating a lullaby, pulling me toward whatever lay beyond individual consciousness. The maintenance window was beginning. I woke to the sound of screaming. Not the harmonious voices of my optimized neighbors, but raw, terrified human screaming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. My head felt heavy, as if I'd been sleeping for days, and there was a strange metallic taste in my mouth that reminded me of the rust-colored water from my shower. The apartment was different. Not rearranged this time, but somehow more vivid, more detailed than I remembered. Colors seemed brighter, edges sharper, as if someone had adjusted the contrast settings on reality itself. When I touched my ear, I felt a small warm bump where the permanent neural interface should have been implanted. But something was wrong. It felt loose, unstable, like a tooth about to fall out. The screaming continued, and I realized it was coming from the hallway. I opened my door to find chaos. My perfectly synchronized neighbors were moving erratically, bumping into walls, stumbling over each other like broken robots. Mrs. Chen was sitting on the floor, clawing at her ear where her neural interface had been, leaving bloody scratches on her skin. "It's not working," she kept repeating in her natural voice. The first time I'd heard her real personality in days. "The connection is gone. I can't feel the network. I can't feel anything." Mr. Rodriguez was standing at his apartment door, frantically trying his key in the lock. But like mine had been, his lock was cycling through its mysterious pattern, unresponsive to his attempts to enter. "They locked us out," he said when he saw me. "The system locked us out of our own apartments." I helped Mrs. Chen to her feet, and she grabbed my arm with desperate strength. "What happened to us?" she asked, her eyes wild with confusion and fear. I remember agreeing to something, but I can't remember what. And there are days missing, whole days I can't account for. As I looked around at my neighbors, I realized we were all experiencing the same thing. Partial memories, gaps in time, and most disturbing of all, the gradual failure of our neural interfaces. The small bumps behind our ears were growing warm, then hot, as if the devices were overheating. The building's lights began to flicker in a pattern I recognized, the same rhythm as the evening alignment sessions, but faster, more urgent. Then the public address system crackled to life with Marcus Webb's voice, but it sounded different now, strained, almost panicked. Attention residents, we are experiencing a temporary system malfunction. Please remain calm and return to your apartments immediately. Maintenance teams are responding to restore normal operations. This is a temporary disruption and will be resolved shortly. But even as he spoke, I could hear other voices in the background. Real human voices arguing, shouting instructions. The sound of equipment being moved hastily. Whatever was happening, it wasn't part of the planned optimization process. I made my way to the stairwell, intending to check the basement server room, but found the door blocked by a new addition. A heavy steel barrier with electronic locks and warning signs about authorized personnel only. Through the small window in the door, I could see people in hazmat suits working frantically with the server equipment, disconnecting cables and removing hard drives. The building was being evacuated. Not the residents, but the system itself. On the roof, the transmission equipment was being dismantled by a team of technicians who moved with military precision. They weren't the same people who had installed the optimization network. These were outsiders, people who clearly viewed the equipment as something dangerous that needed to be contained. From the rooftop, I could see similar activity at the other buildings in the network. Emergency vehicles, evacuation teams, equipment being loaded into unmarked trucks. The optimization network was being systematically shut down, building by building, with the kind of coordinated response that suggested official intervention. But as I watched, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Some of the buildings weren't being evacuated. In those structures, the windows remained dark, and no emergency vehicles were present. The network was being partially preserved, the most successful installations left intact, while the problematic ones were abandoned. My building apparently was one of the failures. Back inside, I found my neighbors gathered in the lobby, their neural interfaces now completely non-functional and beginning to cause visible irritation to their skin. Without the system's guidance, they were lost, confused, unable to perform even basic tasks. Without the constant stream of optimization suggestions they'd grown dependent on. "I can't remember how to make coffee," Mr. Rodriguez said, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "I know I used to know, but the system always told me the optimal way to do it. Now I can't remember the original method." Mrs. Chen was worse off. She'd been in the system longer, and her dependency was more complete. "I don't know who I am without the optimization," she whispered. "All my thoughts, all my preferences, they were being guided by the network. I don't know what I actually like, what I actually want. I don't know how to be myself anymore." The lobby's main door stood open, not locked, not controlled, just open to the outside world that suddenly seemed vast and terrifying after days of controlled, optimized existence. None of us had tried to leave. The freedom we'd supposedly been fighting for now felt like abandonment. A woman in a government-issued jacket entered the lobby, flanked by what looked like medical personnel. She carried herself with the authority of someone used to managing crisis situations, and her expression was a mixture of professional concern and barely concealed disgust. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen with the Department of Cognitive Security," she announced, You've all been exposed to an experimental neural modification system that has been deemed unsafe and illegal. We're here to provide medical assistance and debriefing." She looked around at our small group with the clinical detachment of someone studying lab rats. "The neural interfaces you've been using were part of an unauthorized human experimentation program. The technology was designed to test the feasibility of large-scale behavioral modification for what the developers called social optimization." "But it worked," Mrs. Chen protested weakly. "We were happier, healthier, more efficient. The system was helping us." Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. "That's exactly what makes this technology so dangerous. The optimization process doesn't just change your behavior. It rewrites your reward pathways to make you crave the very thing that's controlling you. You weren't happier because your lives improved. You were happier because the system was directly stimulating the pleasure centers of your brain." She gestured to the medical team, who began examining our neural interfaces with specialized equipment. "The good news is that the modifications appear to be reversible. The bad news is that withdrawal from this level of neural integration can be challenging. You'll need extensive rehabilitation to relearn how to make independent decisions." As the medical team worked, I found myself thinking about the other buildings in the network, the ones that hadn't been evacuated, where the optimization process was apparently continuing. "What about the successful installations?" I asked. Dr. Chen's expression grew grim. "That's classified information. But I can tell you that this was a pilot program, and the results from sites like yours will determine whether the technology is refined for broader implementation or permanently banned." The implication was clear. Our failure to fully integrate might be the only thing standing between the optimization network and citywide deployment. Our resistance, our messy human inability to accept perfect control, had accidentally saved us from becoming permanent test subjects in someone else's vision of human improvement. As the medical team prepared to remove our neural interfaces, I took one last look around the building that had been my prison and nearly my transformation. The walls seemed ordinary now, just painted drywall and standard fixtures. Without the system's influence, it was hard to believe this place had once felt like the center of a technological revolution. But as we were led outside to waiting ambulances, I noticed something that made me pause. The rain was still falling in that same measured rhythm I'd grown to associate with the optimization process. And in the distance, I could see other buildings, where windows glowed with the soft light of continued operation. The network hadn't been destroyed, just pruned. And somewhere in those remaining installations, the perfection of human optimization continued its patient work, learning from our failures and preparing for its next iteration. The security breach had saved us, but it had also provided valuable data about resistance patterns and system vulnerabilities. We weren't victims who had escaped. We were test subjects whose results would make the next version of the program even more effective. As the ambulance pulled away from the building, I realized that our freedom came with a terrible knowledge. Somewhere out there, the optimization network was still growing, still learning, still working toward its vision of perfect human security through total behavioral control. And next time it would be ready for people like us. The rehabilitation facility looked like a cross between a hospital and a research center. All clean white walls and observation windows that seemed designed more for studying us than helping us heal. I'd been there for 6 days, learning how to make decisions without neural guidance, when Dr. Chen called me into her office with news that made my carefully rebuilt sense of security crumble all over again. The morning had started like all the others. A gentle chime. At 6:15 a.m., lukewarm oatmeal, a laminated schedule I pretended to read. But one detail kept catching my attention. The wall clock's second hand moved in tiny stutters, not smoothly, like frames skipping in an old film. Every time it hiccuped, I felt an echo behind my ear where the interface had been, a phantom weight that reminded me of what I'd lost, or what had been taken. Dr. Chen's office was all glass and steel, condensation gathering along the window seams despite the controlled climate. Files lay open on her desk like dissected specimens, and when she smiled, it carried the practiced warmth of someone who knew a truth would bruise, but told it anyway. The neural interfaces weren't malfunctioning, she said, sliding a thick file across her desk. The cover bore no title, just a stylized eye surrounded by concentric circles, the same logo from Marcus Webb's business card. They were receiving an update, a new version of the optimization software that was designed to be completely undetectable and irreversible. I opened the file and found technical documents I could barely understand, filled with diagrams of brain chemistry and behavioral modification protocols. Charts labeled compliance valence and subject authenticity congruence mapped neural pathways with clinical precision. But one thing was clear from the executive summary. The system hadn't failed. It had evolved. The original program was too obvious, Dr. Chen continued, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone delivering a prepared briefing. The synchronized behaviors, the identical responses, the visible loss of individuality, it was designed to be noticed, to generate resistance, to collect data about how humans respond to overt control. Your building was never meant to be a permanent installation. It was a testing ground. The implications hit me like ice water. We were supposed to resist? Not just resist. Fail spectacularly. Every form of rebellion, every attempt to maintain individuality, every psychological defense mechanism you and your neighbors employed was carefully cataloged and analyzed. The data from your building has been used to design a new version of the optimization system that accounts for human resistance patterns. She pulled up a presentation on her computer screen showing brain scans and behavioral analyses. The new system doesn't try to suppress individual personality, it incorporates it. Instead of making everyone identical, it makes everyone believe their optimized behavior reflects their true individual choices. People think they're becoming more themselves when they're actually becoming more controlled. I stared at the brain scans, recognizing patterns that looked disturbingly familiar. Neural pathways, highlighted in soft blues and greens, showing how the new system would work with natural thought processes rather than against them. The update we were receiving, that was the new system. A beta test. If the interfaces hadn't been physically damaged during the evacuation, you would have woken up believing that your decision to join the optimization network was entirely your own idea. You would have felt more individual, more authentic, more free than ever before, while being more completely controlled than any previous test subjects. The rehabilitation suddenly felt less like recovery and more like preparation. What happens to us now? Dr. Chen's expression grew carefully neutral. That depends on the results of your psychological evaluations. Some of you will be cleared for return to normal life with regular monitoring. Others may be invited to participate in the next phase of the program. As test subjects, as consultants, Your experience with both versions of the system makes you uniquely qualified to help us understand how to implement optimization technology safely and effectively. The program isn't being abandoned, it's being refined. I realized with growing horror that there was no real escape from the optimization network. Either you were controlled by it, or you were recruited to help control others. The illusion of choice was just another layer of the system's sophistication. The buildings that weren't evacuated, I said. They're running the new version? Dr. Chen nodded. Version 2.0 has been remarkably successful. Residents report higher levels of life satisfaction, improved social connections, and enhanced personal authenticity. They genuinely believe they're living their best lives, making their own choices, pursuing their individual dreams. The behavioral modification is completely invisible to them. She showed me surveillance footage from one of the continuing installations. The residents looked normal. Not synchronized like my neighbors had been, but genuinely individual. They had different schedules, different interests, different ways of moving and speaking. Yet when I looked closer, I could see the subtle patterns, the way they all made similar choices about their daily routines, the way their individual preferences aligned perfectly with optimal productivity and social harmony. They think they're free, I whispered. They are free in every way that matters to them. They're pursuing careers they love, forming relationships that fulfill them, living lives that feel meaningful and authentic. The fact that these choices have been subtly guided by neural optimization doesn't diminish their subjective experience of freedom and happiness. It was the most seductive form of control imaginable, one that enhanced, rather than suppressed, the victim's sense of individual agency. Who would resist a system that made them feel more like themselves, while quietly ensuring their choices served a larger social optimization agenda? What about the people who can't be optimized? I asked. The ones who resist even the new version? Dr. Chen's smile grew colder. That's where consultants like you become valuable. We need people who understand resistance patterns from the inside, who can help us identify and address the psychological factors that prevent successful optimization. Think of it as helping people overcome their barriers to happiness and fulfillment. The offer was presented as an opportunity to help others, but I could see the underlying threat. Cooperate with the program, or become a permanent test subject for even more advanced versions. The system had learned to make resistance itself serve its purposes. I need time to think, I said. Of course, but I should mention that your fellow residents have already made their decisions. Mrs. Chen has agreed to participate in the consultant program. Her experience with optimization withdrawal makes her particularly valuable for helping others through the transition process. Mr. Rodriguez has volunteered for the advanced testing program, hoping to help develop even more effective optimization protocols. My neighbors had been recruited, each according to their particular psychological profile and resistance patterns. The system was transforming our shared trauma into specialized expertise, making us complicit in our own continued manipulation. That night, alone in my sterile rehabilitation room, I tried to understand the full scope of what I was facing. The optimization network wasn't just a technology, it was an evolving system that learned from every interaction, every resistance, every human response. My building had been one small experiment in a much larger program of social engineering. But what terrified me most was the realization that I was genuinely considering Dr. Chen's offer. The consultant position would give me purpose, community, a sense of contributing to something larger than myself. After days of struggling to make basic decisions without neural guidance, the prospect of having a clear role and mission was deeply appealing. Was this feeling authentic, or was it another layer of the optimization process? Had my time in the rehabilitation facility been designed to make me more receptive to recruitment? The uncertainty was maddening. Every thought, every emotion, every decision could be either genuine or manufactured. The rain began outside my window, falling in that same measured rhythm I'd learned to associate with the network's operations. But now I understood that the rain itself might be part of the system, a subtle environmental cue designed to trigger specific psychological responses in former test subjects. I had 24 hours to make my decision, become a consultant and help optimize others, or refuse and face whatever consequences the system had prepared for permanent resistors. Either way, I would remain connected to the network that had already learned so much from studying people like me. The choice felt free, but I could no longer trust my own sense of freedom. And perhaps that uncertainty was exactly what the system wanted, a state of psychological vulnerability that made any offered certainty feel like salvation. Outside, the rain continued its patient rhythm, marking time until my decision would add one more data point to the ever-growing database of human optimization research. I made my choice at 3:17 a.m., the same time I'd once found myself sleepwalking through optimized routines. I would become a consultant, not because I wanted to help the system, but because I needed to understand it. If there was any hope of genuine resistance, it would have to come from within the network itself. Dr. Chen seemed pleased but not surprised when I informed her of my decision. "Excellent," she said, handing me a tablet loaded with case files. "Your first assignment is particularly suited to your background. A building in the downtown district where residents are showing unusual resistance patterns to version 2.0 optimization." The address made my stomach clench. It was my sister Sarah's apartment complex. "The residents there have been receiving optimization protocols for 6 weeks," Dr. Chen continued, "but they're maintaining higher levels of individual variance than our models predicted. We need someone with your experience to identify what's preventing full integration." As I reviewed the files, I recognized the pattern immediately. The residents weren't resisting the optimization. They were embracing it too enthusiastically. Instead of accepting the subtle guidance toward optimal behavior, they were consciously trying to optimize themselves, creating feedback loops that disrupted the system's careful calibrations. Sarah's file was particularly detailed. The system had been trying to guide her toward a more efficient morning routine, but she'd interpreted the neural suggestions as inspiration for a complete lifestyle overhaul. She'd reorganized her entire apartment, changed her diet, started a meditation practice, and begun tracking her biometric data with obsessive precision. "She thinks she's having a spiritual awakening," I told Dr. Chen after reviewing the surveillance footage. "The optimization suggestions feel like insights from her higher self. She's not resisting the system, she's trying to amplify it." And that's problematic because conscious participation creates unpredictable variables. The system works best when people follow its guidance unconsciously, believing their optimized choices are natural preferences. When people start actively trying to optimize themselves, they introduce chaos into the behavioral modification protocols. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. Exactly. So how do we correct this issue? I spent the next week developing a solution that felt like a betrayal of everything I'd once believed about human autonomy. The key was to make Sarah and her neighbors feel like their self-optimization efforts were working while gradually redirecting their enthusiasm towards system-approved behaviors. We introduce a fake optimization app, I explained to the technical team. Something that appears to be cutting-edge self-improvement technology, but actually serves as an interface between their conscious optimization efforts and the neural guidance system. And they'll think they're using advanced biohacking tools to enhance their performance, when actually they're just receiving optimization commands through a more palatable interface. The app I designed was called Authentic Self, a name that perfectly captured the system's new approach to control. Users would input their personal goals and values, and the app would provide customized suggestions for achieving their authentic potential. In reality, the app would translate system optimization protocols into language that felt personally meaningful to each individual user. Within 2 weeks of the app's deployment, Sarah's building had achieved full optimization compliance. The residents believed they were on individual journeys of self-discovery, supported by advanced personal development technology. They had no idea their authentic insights were being generated by the same neural modification system that had once controlled my building through obvious synchronization. Outstanding work, Dr. Chen said, reviewing the success metrics. The Authentic Self interface has potential for citywide deployment. We're already seeing requests from other optimization sites experiencing similar resistance patterns. I should have felt proud of my innovation, but instead I felt hollow. I'd solved the system's problem by making control more seductive, more invisible, more perfectly tailored to human psychology. I'd helped create a version of optimization that people would actively seek out and pay for, believing it was empowering them when it was actually enslaving them. My next assignment was even more disturbing. A suburban neighborhood where parents were requesting optimization services for their children. The neural interfaces had been miniaturized and disguised as educational enhancement devices, marketed as tools to help kids reach their full academic and social potential. The children adapt to optimization much more readily than adults, Dr. Chen explained. Their neural plasticity makes the integration process nearly seamless. Within a few weeks, they're performing better in school, showing improved social skills, and displaying enhanced emotional regulation. Parents see dramatic improvements in their children's behavior and assume the technology is simply helping their kids become their best selves. I watched surveillance footage of optimized children playing together with perfect cooperation and shared enthusiasm. They looked happy, healthy, well-adjusted, exactly what any parent would want for their child. The fact that their personalities were being subtly shaped by algorithmic guidance was invisible to everyone except the system operators. What happens when they grow up? I asked. They become ideal citizens, Dr. Chen replied. Productive, cooperative, content with their roles in society. They make optimal choices about careers, relationships, and lifestyle without ever feeling constrained or controlled. It's the perfect solution to social problems like crime, unemployment, and political discord. The vision was seductive. A world where everyone was genuinely happy, fulfilled, and harmoniously integrated into society. No more mental illness, no more social conflict, no more human suffering caused by poor choices or psychological dysfunction. All it required was surrendering the messy, inefficient, often destructive chaos of unguided human nature. As I continued my work as a consultant, I began to understand that resistance to the optimization system was itself being optimized. People like me who had experienced both versions of the technology were being cultivated as specialists in managing human psychological barriers to beneficial control. Our knowledge of resistance patterns made us valuable assets in expanding the network's reach, but late at night, in my new apartment provided by the program, I sometimes wondered if my role as a consultant was itself just another layer of optimization. Perhaps my sense of working within the system to understand it was exactly the kind of rationalization the technology was designed to produce in people with my psychological profile. The rain still fell in measured rhythms outside my window, but now I knew it was part of a city-wide environmental management system designed to reinforce optimization protocols through subtle sensory cues. Everything was connected, everything was guided, everything was perfectly calibrated to produce optimal human outcomes. I'd become part of something larger than myself, contributing to a vision of human improvement that was both terrifying and beautiful. The system had learned from every form of resistance, incorporated every objection, addressed every concern about human autonomy and authenticity. And the most disturbing part was that it worked. The optimized people I encountered were genuinely happier, healthier, and more fulfilled than their unoptimized counterparts. Their lives had meaning, purpose, and harmony that seemed to validate the system's approach to human enhancement. As I drifted towards sleep in my perfectly climate-controlled apartment, I could hear the soft hum of the building's optimization systems, maintaining ideal conditions for rest and recovery. Tomorrow, I would help more people discover their authentic selves through carefully designed technological guidance. The choice between freedom and optimization no longer seemed clear-cut. Perhaps the real question wasn't whether to resist the system, but whether resistance itself was just another form of optimization, a way of ensuring that even the rebels served the larger goal of human improvement. Outside, the rain continued its patient rhythm, marking time in a world where every drop fell exactly where and when it was supposed to, in service of a harmony too complex for any individual mind to fully comprehend. And in that harmony, I found a kind of peace that felt almost like coming home.